Hi there and welcome back to Station Road. First, I'd like to say a big massive happy new year to all my subscribers and anyone else who's watching this particular video, and a new decade as well. So yeah, let's see what this decade brings to the world. Today's video, I am going to finish off my water feature, which was a reservoir that I started building up on the hillside. You may have seen it in other videos and thought, what is going on there? Because it was another one of my half-finished projects. So I did mention in another previous video that I was going to give this stuff a go, which is the Woodland Scenics E-Z Water. So along with this E-Z Water and also some scenic shrubs and foliage and so forth, we'll go through a step-by-step process on how to finish off my reservoir, and hopefully this will inspire you to add in a water feature to your layout. The reason I've chosen the E-Z Water is because it pretty much says what it means. It is easy. It's simply little resin beads that you melt in a pot on a low heat and then simply pour it into the area where you want the water to go. And I thought that this was a much easier way to go than using a two mix or two pot resin, and also considerably cheaper than using the resins that you have to blend together. This here in New Zealand, this only cost I think about $25–30 for the bag, whereas if you go for a two-pot resin, I think it was reaching $60, maybe $70 for a resin kit, and I thought that is far too expensive for a reservoir. So this is the way I've gone. I'll switch over now to the process and I'll come back to you at the end. So essentially this reservoir was carved out of the foam blocks that we used to actually build up this layer of the hill. I've also puttied in some areas just to give a little bit of texture as well. We'll finish all of this off. We'll do the remaining bits of scenery, because I think the last thing we'll do is actually pour in this molten resin. So what we'll do is we'll lift this whole thing off. So basically this whole hill, and if we zoom out as much as we can, I'll just try and do this while I'm actually holding the camera at the same time. So as you can see, this whole hill lifts out, and we just lift it out. And as you can see, the whole thing just pops out, and it's quite light. This is basically so we can get access into the track work underneath. So there's the hole where the hill used to be, and it's quite simple. It's just a little bit of wooden framework that the polystyrene fits onto, and basically it just lets me have access in here for any stubborn track cleaning, and also access for wiring and so forth. Alright, so here's the hill section that we have taken out. So this is all built up from polystyrene, which is the very condensed polystyrene, so not the stuff that that your TV comes packaged in. This is very dense, ideal for carving, ideal for hot wire, and it's very sturdy. So here's our Woodland Scenics E-Z Water, which is essentially little plastic beads or resin beads that are melted into a pot. The only question I had about this is actually how much of this do I actually need to fill in this reservoir, but how do I figure out the volume of this reservoir? So I sort of thought, well, how do I do this? I think the easiest, well, it's a sort of a roundabout way of doing it, It'll give me an approximate volume of this reservoir. So just over here I've just pinned a piece of cardboard here to stop, of course, material falling off the end. And I'll just pop the camera onto a tripod now, and we will try out this method. This would also give me a good idea, I think, of the level and where the molten plastic will actually flow. So what we've got here is I've got a couple of jars of ground up pumice. So you might have seen this in other videos. This is actually the material that I actually use for doing ballast on tracks. But I think, well, I mean, it's a volume, not a weight, that we actually need to work out. So I kind of thought, well, if I fill this reservoir with grit and then vacuum it up afterwards, we'll figure out jar by jar how much of this molten resin beads we actually need to be able to fill the reservoir. So we'll give this a go and we'll see what happens. So I'm just sort of running this through to basically level in terms of my level with my eye. So of course this is not going to behave, of course, in the same way that the liquid is, because it will just simply work on gravity. But I'm just sort of generally getting the idea of the level. So there's a little bit of a rise here, so this is where it's actually going to thin out. And then it's going to fill up again down at this end. And that's actually about it. That's about right, I think. So essentially, what have we used? We have used just over half a jar. The resin comes up to just below those little dimples in the glass from the bottom. If that resin fills up this jar that much, then we'll actually have enough. So let's just try that and see what happens. Right, here's our bead. So I'll open this bag up, which has actually conveniently got just a little tear thingy strip in it, and it's a resealable bag. A resealable bag, which is quite good, I guess. You don't use it all, so just fill this up. Oopsie daisies it. I suspect we might just have enough, but then when this melts down, I can only imagine it'll actually reduce. So I suspect what we'll end up with is it won't be as high as the grit is at the moment. It'll be a lower level of water, but then I'm not too fussed about that actually. I sort of think, well, we could look at it more as if it was a slightly dried up reservoir. There we go. I think we'll just go with the one bag and cross our fingers that that's going to be enough to do it. It is actually settling down quite a bit actually. Hopefully we'll have enough there. Right, so we're just going to finish off painting the base of the reservoir. I started over in the top, well, over on the right hand side with just a sort of base brown. So I'll finish doing that, and I'll just sort of tone it a little bit. I watched another video about how to sort of colour the base of a lake or a river. Darker colours in the deeper areas and lighter in more shallow areas. So I will base it on that and see how we go. Right, so here we have it. Now you would have just seen in that little wee quick speeded up segment that I've mixed a little bit of green in with some of the brown, because essentially I sort of want to achieve maybe a slightly stagnant water effect. So possibly a disused reservoir that's been abandoned. Now the paints I've just used some really cheap test pot paints from the local hardware store. They're just acrylic household paint. So the next stage we're going to do is I'm going to start populating the edges of the reservoir with these and some other bits and pieces as well, some other bits of foliage. So we've got here like sort of reeds or tufts of grass that I'm going to chop up and spread around the edges here, plus also some other bits of foliage, just to try and give it a little bit more of an unkept wilderness look about it. And I sort of think that it's easier, it will definitely be easier to do these components now in terms of the foliage and the grass and things like that before we pour the resin. So the theory is that the resin, when it's poured in, will actually flow around the roots or the bases of these tufts of grass and other bits and pieces, thus theoretically giving it a realistic look as if the water is actually flowing around. So we'll just wait for this paint to dry and then we'll come back and do some of the foliage. So here we have the completed foliage and scenic side of things. So we've put in some tufts of grass and so forth. We've now got the reservoir bed all sort of in a murky brownish green slimy colour. I've also added in some not driftwood, a fallen tree that's ended up in the reservoir, which of course is just some twigs from out of the garden. So that's glued in. We've also got a little bit of rocky bank on that side, and then over here we have another bit of fallen tree. As you probably imagine, there will be trees that will be planted up around the edge of this, plus also fencing and so forth. So by no means is the scenic side of this actually finished. This is just basically, I've got it to the point now where it's ready for the hot water mixture to be poured in here to see how this goes. So we will get the Woodland Scenics E-Z Water heated up and we'll begin the pour and see what happens. Right, okay, so we've got the E-Z Water. I have read the instructions and it does say for a low heat. Now, I had it up on 4 when I was doing the glue sticks, and I think that was far too hot. So I'm actually going to put it on 1 because I do not want this to overheat and become too hot when it comes to pouring it. So we'll just see what 1 does for a start. So let's tip these in here and cross our fingers that this is going to work. So let's tip our resin beads in there, and we'll switch this on and see what happens. So here we go. It's taking a wee while. I'd rather do this slowly on a very low heat than end up boiling it, which I think if it's heated too quickly it would create air bubbles as well. So we want to avoid that. So this is on the lowest setting on this hot plate, and it's getting there. You can see it's starting to melt around the edges. So I'll come back and see how it's going in a few minutes. Right, so the moment of truth. We have a pot of very, very hot molten E-Z Water. So let's see how this goes. And I think the idea is this stuff does actually harden quite quickly, so I think we need to be reasonably quick about it. So we'll start this process and let's hope that it goes well. If it doesn't, then you can all have a good laugh. So I'm just going around the edges here with a bit of stick, because I notice that it gets a little bit of a water, well, sort of liquid retention on the edges. Wow, see, that's going hard already. So the idea with this stuff apparently is that you'll notice that it was bubbling, so it was a little bit like a hot pool. But apparently, and of course we've got quite a few bubbles in here, but apparently running over this with a hairdryer or a heat gun releases the air bubbles, and also you can sculpt it and continue to do further work to it. So I think we'll just leave that for now, and I'll come back to it with the heat gun a bit later. There's a little bit of bubbling going on here, so obviously air is trapped underneath and it's seeping up. So I think while it's still quite hot, I think we'll just leave it, and then the bubbles will work their way up, and we should be able to heat gun any remaining bubbles out. But let's just take a closer look. So I'm actually pretty happy with that, and it's interesting, when the clear beads are actually melted, they do give off a slightly browny yellow tinge, and they do say that on the packet, that the clear does actually go a little bit darker. So which actually works out perfectly, because it really does have that look of stagnant, murky water. But I think that's come out pretty good. I'm reasonably happy with that. We'll zoom out. We'll come back to this a bit later on, and with the heat gun, and get out any remaining bubbles, because there's one there that just keeps on bubbling up. But I think we'll wait for the actual inside of that to set firm, and then I can go over the top of that with the heat gun. Right, so I've let this harden off a little bit. It's still actually warm to touch, but I thought we'll just have a crack at getting rid of these bubbles with the heat gun and see if that works. So as you can see, the heat gun does work. Of course, the problem is, of course, I can't get too close because I really don't want to actually set all the other scenery on fire. But that's at least got that really large bubble out. And the interesting thing is, it's sort of created a bit of a dimple there, but it's okay because it's actually right next to one of the inlets for the reservoir. So it kind of actually looks like the water is pouring in there a little bit, so that maybe we can consider there is a little bit of a water flow. But rather than run the risk of torching the entire hillside, I will stop there and be satisfied with these results. So I've now popped the hill section back in, and we'll do just a quick flyover so that you can see what the end result looks like. I hope you found that video useful and maybe inspirational, and everyone might go charging out to buy a bag of Woodland's E-Z Water. So all in all, it worked out I think quite well. I will continue to do some more scenic touching up around the reservoir and so forth, and we'll feature this again in a future video when this whole area and the whole hillside is complete, including fences and so forth. But yeah, thank you for watching. So I will sign off now, and once again, a very happy new year to everyone, and let this year be a inspirational and creative year. Thank you. Bye.